Hi, I'm Maxim Vinogradov, and for this video we're gonna take a big ol' look at Stanley Kubrick's horror classic, The Shining. Horror has been widely recognized for its ability to push the envelope in what can be put on screen, both in the sense of horrific images and social milestones. When we look at The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's singular venture into horror, we have to investigate how a director as celebrated and revolutionary as Kubrick utilizes these characteristics of horror to create his film. Namely, if the movie follows Jack Torrance, a white man, does the film champion his whiteness and patriarchy, its fall being a tragedy, or does it condemn the behavior? To look at this, we have to investigate three major clues. 1. Does Kubrick emphasize a disparity specifically between white men and non-white male characters? 2. If so, does this disparity champion one group over the other? Which? 3. Beyond the film as a finished product, how does Kubrick exemplify this ideology in his behavior on set? This last one is a bit of a necessity on top of the rest of the video given the massive amount of lore surrounding Kubrick as a director, namely in his interactions with Shelley Duvall, who plays Jack's wife, Wendy. Before we investigate these clues, we have to recognize where are Kubrick's fingerprints and where are Stephen King's. Yes, the movie is an adaptation of King's novel, but it's fundamentally unfaithful to its source text. So much so that King had to make a bad version of the novel himself. This video is not here to look at King, but if anything, bring in the changes Kubrick made from the source text as an indicator of whether or not Kubrick champions the white patriarchy. For example, in the novel, Dick Hallorann is a major player in saving Wendy and little Danny Torrance. In the movie, that's a major difference we're gonna have to look at. Jack is a struggling writer and recovering alcoholic. He's sworn off drinking to Wendy after injuring Danny in a fit of rage. She can't fully trust him, and that distracts him in his ability to learn from the situation. Wendy's a surprisingly amiable housewife, willing to relocate to the middle of nowhere, albeit a luxurious middle of nowhere, for a whole winter for the sake of her husband's career. Dick is the head chef at this luxurious middle of nowhere, a job that is undeniably more respected than the seasonal caretaker. Jack greets Dick warmly, and his bubbling resentment of Wendy seems more from the fact that she's holding him accountable for his actions than anything else. It isn't until the Overlook Hotel turns up the spooky that we begin to see the disparity does form. In order to seduce Jack into serving the hotel, it taps into the white patriarch within him, which takes surprisingly little nudging. As soon as Wendy's falsely accused Jack of strangling Danny, the conflict at the center of their relationship, Jack immediately goes after Wendy as being the insubordinate housewife.
Just a little problem with the old sperm bank upstairs. Nothing I can't handle.
As the hotel needs to up Jack's behavior into full-on slaughter time, it builds on this misogyny and even incorporates racism in using the N-word as how to identify Dick Hallorann. The hotel knows that any means of bringing in us versus them is what'll make Jack side with the hotel. It's the white male bartender and waiter, Lloyd and Grady, that get Jack into this, and Grady that keeps him in it. The white guys are sticking together.
You've always been the caretaker.
Here's where things definitely get tricky and, of course, gets into the whole point of this video. If you were to watch The Shining and point to a single protagonist, who would you pick? Jack is the character we start and end with. If the protagonist isn't necessarily the good character, but the character we're following, then is Jack the protagonist? And if so, aren't we supposed to be rooting for him? The thing is, Jack is sometimes the protagonist. When Wendy falsely accuses him, we side with Jack. When Jack's breaking a door down, we definitely don't side with Jack. If one could say that the Overlook is the antagonist of all of this, then Jack becoming its puppet is Jack becoming the antagonist. Does that make Wendy the protagonist, and therefore the character we do root for? Okay, so as Carol Clover explains in her essay, Her Body Himself, horror is decorated with the figure known all over now as the final girl. She is the one who encounters the mutilated bodies of her friends and perceives the full extent of the preceding horror and of her own peril, who is chased, cornered, wounded, whom we see scream, stagger, fall, rise, and scream again. She is abject terror personified. The reason the final girl exists is twofold. One, If a movie is made to serve a male gaze, then to have the final figure be a terrified male is to put the male gaze under the threat of murder. Male gazes don't like that, so better make it a not male doing the screaming. 2. Because slashers are so inherently intertwined with lust, the final girl has the opportunity to be sexually mutilated. The teen boys in the audience snuck in to see some softcore nudity, and if the final girl is their last opportunity for that, then they're glued to their seats. The final girl is a character we root for, but also a character celebrating patriarchal comfort. Wendy is a final girl in that she definitely does the screaming and running, but she's very specifically not there to be sexually desired. Throughout the film, Wendy is costumed to be a mom, never a sexual object. All of her behaviors never seem to be from any of her own agency, but at the pleasure of her husband and especially their son. She's often portrayed as frustratingly incompetent. To compare Kubrick's Wendy to King's, in the novel, Wendy has significantly more agency. She isn't an apologist, she's sexually confident, she's a blonde representation of Western beauty. She's the reason a lot of people dislike Shelley Duvall in this movie. If King's Wendy were on screen, she'd be the perfect final girl, being able to see this confident woman fall into utter panic, as King writes. In Cynthia A. Freeland's essay, Feminist Frameworks for Horror Films, she explains how the final girl's sexuality isn't just ripping the clothes off a woman, but punishing a woman who specifically disobeys the patriarchy, saying that final girls are shown as either tomboys or teenage sex fiends who somehow deserve dismemberment at the hands of Jason or Michael Myers. Freeland going on to know how women who don't have sexual agency are instead maternal figures, and because of that, often the monsters, looking at examples like the first Friday the 13th, the Alien franchise, or Jurassic Park. Which leads us back to our question, is Wendy the one we're rooting for, or is Wendy Kubrick's maternal monster? Wendy's false accusation against Jack is sourced from maternity, right? If the final girl punishment of Wendy doesn't come from sexual insubordination, does it intend to be a demonization of mothers who usurp fathers? This leads us to the last option for our protagonist, and whose existence in Also Fleeing Terror disrupts Wendy as our solo final girl, Danny. We want Danny, the child, to live the most, so that's a pretty good indicator for a protagonist. For this film to champion Wendy's struggle and therefore be against Jack and his patriarchy, it must champion Wendy's decisions over Jack's. If Wendy's decisions are to help the protagonist, Danny, then that all checks out. The question there is, of course, is if Jack was a good father. If Jack was a good father, then Wendy wasn't protecting Danny, she was arguably stealing him from the patriarch. Jack has plenty of love for Danny and argues this frequently. His recollection of attacking Danny posits that it's Wendy's overreaction to it that was the problem, not any abusive behavior on his own part. This really is the biggest difference from the novel. When Danny has bruises on his neck, King's Jack agrees with Wendy that they should leave the Overlook to get him help, whereas Kubrick's Jack finds this to be an opportunity to attack Wendy. Movie Jack straight up chases Danny through a hedge maze with no mercy, whereas Book Jack actually has a moment of fatherly snapping out of it. "Doc," Jack Torrance said, "run away, quick, and remember how much I love you." "No," Danny said. "Oh, Danny, for God's sake, no," Danny said. He took one of his father's bloody hands and kissed it. It's almost over. Just like Kubrick made Wendy more simplistic in her maternity, Kubrick made Jack more simplistic in his lack of paternity. Jack is not a good father. Wendy is a good mother. Although maternal roles are part of the patriarchy, that crosses itself out when the mother is going against the father in order to be maternal. In the case of Torrance versus Torrance, the patriarch is the undisputed villain. The portrayal of Dick Halloran is pretty hard to read from a distance. Kubrick has Jack kill him, where King has Dick outlive Jack. Is this a display of superiority in calling Dick expendable, a prop that was only there to serve the other characters, and despite going to incredible lengths, failing to do so? Or does Jack killing Dick give us as the audience a clear moment of I like that guy and don't like that guy? In Robert Stamm and Louise Spence's Colonialism, Racism, and Representation, the pair look at how representations of people of color on film are all about the subliminal details. The first detail is to recognize if the character is portrayed as being positive or negative. Dick is a kind person who cares about Danny's safety, but black incarnations of patience and gradualism, for example, have always been more pleasing to whites than to blacks, and that while nice images may appear more uplifting, they leave room for a bourgeois facade for paternalism, a more pervasive racism. And here, in an odd way, seeing Dick with the posters of the nude women is kind of a major step against this. If Dick were unkind and had these posters, this would be a decisively negative representation Kubrick is trying to put forward. The fact that he's so good to the white heroes but shown as being not Mr. Rogers makes him more human and therefore caring, not subordinate. The second detail Stam and Spence would bring on the topic of Dick is in spectator positioning. On film, we have the opportunity to follow a direct point of view. To accompany that person is to side with that person. Stam and Spence referenced the use of this in 1966's Battle of Algiers, where it's through Algerian eyes, for example, that we witness a condemned Algerian walk to his execution. It is from within the Kasbah that we see and hear the French troops and helicopters. This time it is the colonized who are encircled and menaced, and with whom we identify. As Dick walks down the hallway where we also have Jack, we're following Dick, not Jack. Dick will walk down this hallway and be attacked, and we're attacked with Dick. Kubrick does not put us with Jack waiting behind the pillar because Kubrick does not want us to be on Jack's side here. So to answer our second question, it seems pretty clear that Kubrick wants Wendy and Dick to have the audience's stakes, not Jack. Yes, there's a disparity, and Kubrick really does seem to not champion the actions and ideologies of the represented white patriarch. The white patriarch struggles for power and pathetically fails. He's physically bested by a woman and mentally bested by a child. This guy's no champion, the others are. Oh boy. Alright, so yeah, Stanley Kubrick made a movie that seemingly upsets the white patriarchy. Big whoop. All of this video is based on theory and readings of the film. You have to look at Kubrick as an artist to get ultimately the best view of what he was doing. If I say that Kubrick champions non-white men, and then on set he definitely championed white men, then we have to rethink this whole thing and look at it through a much more confused magnifying glass. On the racial side, there's not a whole ton to go on. Scadman Crothers, who played Dick, has some stuff to say that's pretty hard to read as inauthentic.
If you see tears, it will be tears of joy. Because I thank the Lord I'm here, was able to work with such beautiful people.
Instead, we're going to look at the much louder story, Kubrick's notorious treatment of Shelley Duvall. Now, directors can get pretty disagreeable with actors, but here's Jack Nicholson in High Spirits with Kubrick. High Spirits with Kubrick. And High Spirits with Kubrick.
Excellent. Right, check the gate, Doug.
Here's Duvall and Kubrick.
I don't think the lines are going to make an awful lot of difference if you get the right attitude.
Duvall and Kubrick.
Oh, come on. What do you mean roll video? We're f***ing killing ourselves out here, and you're going to be ready.
I am too. I'm
Should we
standing
play
right by
mood
the
music?
door.
You get the point. Both Nicholson and Duvall needed to be driven to insanity in their characters, but Kubrick didn't abuse Nicholson. Kubrick definitely abused Duvall.
I was really in and out of ill health because the stress of the role was so great.
Kubrick is responsible for a lot of hypermasculine films. Kubrick made one of the most gratuitous rape scenes of all time. Kubrick made that movie that solidified who your self-identified incel cousin is. It'd make a lot of sense for Kubrick to be misogynist who emotionally and mentally abused women and not men. But yelling at Shelley Duvall and making her do the same take 100 times doesn't compare to actually forcing McDowell to wear the eye thing, despite McDowell's begging to take it off to the point of his tearing a cornea. Or actually dunking him in meat water on a freezing cold day for way longer than you should be dunking your actors in meat water. Digging around, it seems like Duvall was the one who brought the most attention to an abusive filmmaker, as she should have, but Kubrick seemed to be indiscriminately insane.
Single-mindedly. It's emotional on the set.
Ultimately, while there's a lot of possibility for public amiability or Stockholm Syndrome, Duvall did recognize the disagreements as being artistically meritorious rather than specifically targeted as abusing a woman.
You get more out of yourself. And he knew that. So I resented Stanley at times because he pushed me. And it hurt. And it's just the necessary turmoil to get out of it what you want out of it. And I find I really respect him and really like him, both as a person and as a director. I mean, I'm
So, in looking at The Shining as another installment in a long series of horror films that stand by a socially progressive ideology, it does seem like Kubrick contributed. The film shows a white man who thinks he deserves everything fall due to his own sense of ego. There's a final girl trope and a black man who does everything to save the white kid, but these do seem to align with the message of not siding with the white guy. Kubrick has all kinds of reasons to be recognized as being not the best, but as long as you avert your eyes to certain things, you can still enjoy The Shining for what it is.
Hi, Lloyd. Been away, but now I'm back.